If you have ever laughed until you cried at a picture of an actual raw chicken just floating in a metal cooking pot in the middle of the ocean.
Which is a very specific image.
It really is. But I mean, or if you've ever felt that intense, sweaty, just suffocating secondhand embarrassment watching a comedian completely terrorize an unsuspecting coffee shop owner on television.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if you've done that, you are actually participating in a century-old artistic rebellion.
You really are.
And it's not just about the internet being a weird, quirky place, right?
No.
Because if we trace the DNA of that chicken floating in a pot, it takes us directly past the 2008 financial crash.
Right.
It goes right through the anxieties of the Cold War, and it drops us straight into the bloody, mustard gas-filled trenches of World War I.
It's a huge leap, I know.
It is. So today we're doing a deep dive into how the darkest, most chaotic moments in human history gave birth to, well, our absolute favorite coping mechanism today.
Weaponized absurdity.
Exactly. Relentless, weaponized absurdity. We're looking at an extensive stack of cultural critiques and historical academic papers today to figure out how cringe basically became the defining art form of our time.
And it is a profound lineage to trace, I think.
Yeah.
Because when we sit on our couches, just scrolling through bizarrely deep-fried images on Reddit,
or watching a guy in a hot dog suit crash a car through a window.
Right, exactly. We don't naturally assume we are engaging in a high-minded philosophical movement. But the historical reality from all these sources is that there is a direct, unbroken line from the unimaginable trauma of the early 20th century to the digital landscape we live in today.
Right.
Yeah. We're looking at a movement initially known as Dadaism, and it has mutated over 100 years into modern cringe and internet surrealism.
So it's not just like random noise?
No, the central thesis here is that this aggressive absurdity is not random at all. It is, and always has been, a deeply necessary psychological pressure valve. It's for generations of people who are just dealing with an increasingly chaotic, illogical world.
Okay, so to even begin to understand why a low-resolution picture of a hamster makes perfect emotional sense to millions of people today, we have to travel back.
We have to go back to the origin point.
Right, the actual origin point of all this chaos. So we're going to Zurich, Switzerland. The year is 1915. And we need to walk into a place called the Cabaret Voltaire.
You really have to picture the setting here. Zurich in 1915 is this neutral haven, and it's situated right in the middle of a continent that is actively tearing itself apart.
Because World War I is just raging all around them.
Exactly. And it's important to understand the shock of this specific war. I mean, this wasn't a traditional battlefield conflict. It was mechanized, industrialized slaughter on a scale humanity had never conceived of.
Right, it's machine guns, it's chemical weapons.
French warfare. The sheer terrifying efficiency of the violence created a profound crisis of faith in the modern world. So you have this massive influx of draft-evading intellectuals.
Fleeing the devastation.
Yeah. Painters, poets, provocateurs, all flooding into neutral Switzerland to escape the draft. And a German poet named Hugo Ball, along with a profoundly talented cabaret performer named Emmy Hennings, they basically rented the back room of a tavern.
On this cramped, narrow street called Spiegelgasse, right?
Yes, and they named it the Cabaret Voltaire.
And from everything I've read about this place in the source material, it wasn't, a quiet sanctuary where people sat around sipping wine and politely discussing politics.
Oh, not at all.
It was an absolute madhouse. It was loud, it was confusing, and it was deliberately hostile to the senses.
It was an eruption. And the reason for that chaos is rooted in a very specific philosophical realization. These artists looked around at the devastation of Europe and realized something horrifying.
Oh, what was it?
They realized the very institutions that had caused this mass slaughter were built on the foundations of the Enlightenment, the ideals of logic, rational thought, progress, and order.
The exact things that were supposed to make society good.
Right. Those were exactly the principles that governments had used to justify marching millions of young men into the meat grinder of the trenches. So they concluded that if logic brought the world to this insane, blood-soaked reality, then logic itself was completely bankrupt.
Oh, wow. So the only sane response to a world that has gone completely mad is to reject sanity altogether.
Precisely. If rationality led to war, then art, true, vital art, must completely reject rational thought.
So they decided to fight global insanity with their own highly curated intentional chaos.
Yes, they did.
Which is a fascinating concept. But how do you actually put that into practice? Like, you're a poet or a painter sitting in a Swiss nightclub. How do you physically create something that actively destroys the concept of logic?
Well, you start by dismantling the very tools of communication. Consider the work of the Romanian poet Tristan Tzara.
He's a big figure there.
Oh, he became one of the central, loudest figures of the Dada movement. Tzara wanted to destroy the authority of language itself. To do this, he invented chance-generated poetry.
Chance-generated. Like rolling dice.
Sort of. He would stand on the stage at the Cabaret Voltaire, take a newspaper article, and literally cut out every individual word with fizzers.
Just a huge pile of individual words.
Yep. He'd drop all these tiny scraps of paper into a hat, shake it up, and then pull the words out one by one. The random order in which the words were drawn became the poem, and he would read it aloud to the audience right then and there.
So he's literally turning the creation of literature into a lottery?
He was destroying semantics. By removing the author's intent and relying entirely on chance, he was refusing the necessity for language to make rational sense.
That's wild.
It was a way of proving that the rigid structures of grammar and syntax, which are essentially the rules of society, were arbitrary and meaningless. It was an act of linguistic sabotage.
But they didn't stop at just sabotaging poetry, right? They went after the absolute foundation of what the world considered fine art.
Oh, absolutely.
Which brings us to Marcel Duchamp. And the piece that basically broke the 20th century, I'm talking about The Fountain.
The Fountain.
Right, so it's 1917, and Duchamp takes a completely ordinary, mass-produced porcelain urinal. He flips it upside down, grabs a brush, paints a fake signature on it, R. Mutt, 1917, and submits it to a massive art exhibition in New York.
And this exhibition was run by the Society of Independent Artists.
Yeah, and their whole gimmick was that they would accept literally any piece of art as long as the artist paid the entrance fee.
Which was the trap.
Exactly. Duchamp paid the fee, submitted a urinal, and threw the entire board into a complete panic. They were so offended and confused by it that they actually hid it behind a partition so the public couldn't even see it.
And the panic is the crucial part of that story. Why were they panicked?
Yeah.
Because Duchamp had detonated a conceptual bomb right in the middle of their institution.
Because it wasn't a painting or a sculpture.
Right. Up until that exact moment, art was defined by technical skill, by beauty, and by the physical labor of a genius creator. A painting was valuable because the painter spent months painstakingly mixing oils and applying brushstrokes.
And then here comes a toilet.
Yes. Duchamp shattered that paradigm entirely. By purchasing a urinal from a plumbing supplier and placing it in a gallery context, he completely destroyed the idea that art required craftsmanship.
He was basically daring them to define what art even is. He's saying, you know, if I point at this piece of plumbing and say, it's art, who are you to tell me it isn't?
He shifted the entire value of art from the physical labor of the hands to the conceptual realm of the mind. He was mocking the institutional authority of the art world.
The critics and the buyers.
The gallery owners, the wealthy elite who dictate what is valuable and what is trash. It was a massive insult to the bourgeois sensibilities of the era.
Now, I want to talk about who was actually driving this movement. Because for decades, the narrative has focused almost exclusively on the men, you know, Duchamp, Tzara, Hugo Ball.
It really has.
But the sources we're looking at point out that this completely overlooks the women who were absolute pioneers of this chaotic rebellion, and in many cases, they were far more radical than the men.
The erasure of the Dada women is a massive historical blind spot. Take Emmy Hennings, for example. She is often reduced to simply being Hugo Ball's companion in the history books.
But she was a founder.
She was the vital lifeblood of the Cabaret Voltaire. She was its principal performer, a mystic, a poet, and someone who had actually served time in prison for forging passports to help men escape the draft.
Oh, wow. So she was actually walking the walk.
Exactly. On stage, she used these incredibly unsettling puppet shows to explore themes of imprisonment, systemic violence, and the rigid gender roles of European society. Her performances were the beating heart of the cabaret's anti-establishment ethos.
And then you have Hannah Hook over in Berlin, because Berlin Dada was much more explicitly political than Zurich Dada.
Very much so.
And Hook was the only female member of the Berlin Dada Club. She basically pioneered the entire art form of photomontage.
And to understand the impact of photomontage, you have to understand the environment she was working in. Post-WWI Germany was the Weimar Republic.
Which was a mess.
It was a fragile, chaotic, deeply unstable democracy. They were struggling with catastrophic hyperinflation, political assassinations, the rising tide of extremism, and the mass media was exploding, flooding the streets with newspapers and magazines, pushing various agendas.
So what did she do with all those magazines?
Hooke took a literal knife to this media landscape. She cut out photographs of politicians, fashion models, industrial machinery, and glued them together into these jarring, chaotic, grotesque compositions.
So she's using their own media against them.
Precisely. She used the very media of the Weimar Republic to launch scathing critiques against its hypocrisy, its mass consumerism, and particularly its restrictive patriarchal politics. She was tearing apart the illusion of the new woman that the magazines were trying to sell.
That is so cool. And you also have Sophie Tauber-Arp, who brought geometric abstraction into the movement, which sounds highly technical, I know, but fundamentally she was taking shapes and patterns and things traditionally relegated to the lesser realms of textiles and weaving.
Which were considered women's work.
Right, exactly. And she was elevating them to challenge the snobbish hierarchies of fine art. And then, oh, we have to talk about Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven.
Oh, the Baroness.
She might be the wildest figure of the entire era. She was a German-born artist living in New York, and she basically walked around as a living, breathing piece of performance art.
She treated her own body as the ultimate data canvas. She would walk down the streets of Greenwich Village wearing elaborate, terrifying costumes. And they were made entirely out of stolen items, industrial trash, and household objects.
Wait, like what kind of objects?
She would wear a coal scuttle on her head as a hat.
Yeah.
She used T-balls as earrings, and she'd wear postage stamps on her face instead of makeup.
That is incredible.
She was aggressive, openly disruptive of gender norms, and utterly terrifying to the polite society of early 20th century New York.
And there's actual credible scholarship in our sources suggesting that the Baroness might have been the original creator of the famous urinal, the fountain.
Yes, there is.
And that Duchamp simply took the credit for it after she sent it to him, which, if true, completely rewrites the entire history of modern art.
The evidence surrounding the Baroness and the fountain is very compelling, and it underscores a larger point. The women of Dada were not just participants, they were the vanguard of pushing the movement out of the galleries and into the physical, lived environment.
So we have this entire group of artists completely tearing down the establishment. To me, it feels like society was a computer that had just completely frozen.
That's a good way to put it.
It was glitching out terribly with the destruction of the war, the mass casualties, the economic collapse. And these artists looked at this frozen machine, realized that just hitting the reset button wasn't going to work, so they reached around the back, unplugged the entire concept of art from the wall, and just decided to start over from absolute scratch.
They absolutely did.
But I have to stop here, because this raises a really massive, glaring problem in my mind.
Okay, what's that?
Well, if Tristan Tzara is claiming that random words pulled out of a hat are poetry, and Duchamp or the Baroness is claiming that a mass-produced plumbing fixture is a masterpiece, doesn't that inherently mean that nothing is art? Like, if literally anything can be art just by pointing at it, doesn't the word art lose all of its utility? How did they keep this entire movement from just collapsing into a void of random, meaningless, lazy noise?
That is the central, unavoidable paradox of Dada. And you are right to point it out, because it is exactly what the critics of the time argued.
It seems like a huge flaw.
But from the perspective of the Dadaists, the void was the point. Dada explicitly and proudly positioned itself as an anti-art movement. They wanted to demolish the utility of the word art because they believed the people who defined art were morally bankrupt.
Okay, so the destruction was intentional.
However, the brilliant contradiction of Dada is that in their furious attempt to destroy the definition of art, they vastly, permanently expanded the boundaries of human expression.
Because suddenly anything was possible.
Right. It wasn't about creating something aesthetically beautiful to hang over a fireplace. It was about the action. The art was not the urinal itself. The art was the disruption of reality that occurred when a person walked into a gallery expecting to see a landscape painting and instead found themselves staring at a toilet.
It's the reaction.
It forced the audience out of their passive consumption. It forced them to question the hypocrisy of the gallery owner, the curator, and the society, telling them what was and wasn't valuable. They used the shock of nonsense to break through the numbed, traumatized perceptions of a society that had just survived a mechanized apocalypse.
Okay, that clarifies the intention perfectly. It's the shock to the system that matters, not the object itself, which sets the stage perfectly for what happens next.
It does.
Because the original Dadaists had to spread their chaotic ideas using printed journals, gallery exhibitions, and rowdy physical cabarets. But if Hugo Ball or Tristan Tzara were alive today, they absolutely would not be sitting in a cramped Swiss nightclub.
They wouldn't need to.
No. They would be on Twitter, they would be on Reddit, they would be scrolling TikTok. The internet is the ultimate frictionless medium for mass collective absurdity.
It truly is. The architecture of the internet operates on the exact same principles that the Dadaists pioneered.
Like what?
Appropriation, relentless remixing, rapid mutation, and a deep, cynical appreciation for the absurd. When we look at the evolution of digital meme culture, it is not a departure from Dada. It is its most highly evolved descendant.
Because anyone can do it.
Exactly. The environment of the internet allows the disruption of reality to happen at the speed of light across a global canvas.
So to understand how we got to the memes of today, the deep dive takes us back to look at the technological constraints of the early internet. Specifically, the release of Windows 95.
In a very specific program that came with it.
Yes, the inclusion of the MS Paint program.
Yeah.
Because MS Paint fundamentally changed the aesthetic of internet humor.
The inclusion of MS Paint on nearly every personal computer in the 1990s democratized digital image creation, but it did so with incredibly stark limitations.
It was not Photoshop, that's for sure.
No, the software was clunky, the pixelation was harsh, the lasso tool used to cut images out created these jagged, rough edges. The color palette was aggressive and neon.
Just bright, painful colors.
But those limitations became the defining aesthetic of early internet culture. Because it was so difficult to make something look good or polished, the culture actively embraced making things look deliberately bad.
Exactly. You didn't need to be a graphic designer with expensive software. You just needed a mouse, 5 minutes, and a joke. And those jagged edges became a badge of honor.
It signaled authenticity.
It showed that the image wasn't some slick corporate marketing graphic. It was made by a real bored person sitting in their basement. And what happened is that these quick and dirty images began to mutate as they were shared anonymously across message boards.
The collective anonymity of the internet acted like Tristan Tzara's hat,
Oh, that's a great connection.
shaking up the context and spitting out something entirely new.
Let's look at a very specific example from the text, The Scared Hamster meme.
The evolution of the scared hamster is a perfect case study in digital mutation. It began as a literal, straightforward image. Someone posted a photo of a hamster cowering in the corner of a cage, looking genuinely terrified, ostensibly because someone was trying to handle it.
Right, just a literal picture of a scared animal.
That is the origin. A cute animal experiencing acute fear. But as that image was downloaded, re-uploaded, cropped, and shared across thousands of forums, the context was entirely stripped away.
People started changing it.
Users started overlaying their own text onto the image. It stopped being a picture of a rodent and morphed into a universal visual manifestation of general, overwhelming human anxiety.
So what kind of text would they add?
The text would say things like, me remembering an embarrassing thing I said in 2012, or me looking at my bank account on a Tuesday.
Which has nothing to do with a hamster.
Exactly. The image remained the same, but the collective mind of the internet weaponized it to communicate an abstract emotional state.
And then the mutations get darker, don't they? You have the classic Bugs Bunny meme. It's a vintage still image from an old Looney Tunes cartoon, where Bugs Bunny is casually pointing a revolver at his own head. But because he's Bugs Bunny, he has this totally relaxed, smug, almost condescending expression on his face, while holding a lethal weapon to his temple.
It's a very striking visual.
And the internet took that single frame and turned it into the ultimate symbol of millennial fatalism. They used it to morbidly signify how they deal with minor, everyday inconveniences.
The disproportionate response.
Right. The caption would be something incredibly mundane, like, when the Wi-Fi drops for 3 seconds during a Zoom call, paired with the image of Bugs Bunny ready to end it all. It takes an innocent childhood icon and injects it with this dark, sarcastic, disproportionate response to reality.
And that disproportionate response is key. It's a comedic exaggeration of fragility. And as the internet matured, the memes became increasingly abstract. They started moving away from established characters like Bugs Bunny and towards pure, unfiltered surrealism.
Which brings us to my absolute favorite image maybe on the entire internet.
Let's hear it.
It is a photograph of a raw, plucked chicken. It is sitting inside a metal cooking pot. And that cooking pot is floating out in the open ocean, just bobbing on the waves.
It is a profoundly nonsensical image. There is no logical reason for a raw chicken to be in a pot at sea.
None at all. But the caption that someone attached to this image is what elevates it to modern art. The text reads, "When your life is aimless and you have no passion or big ambitions and you're depressed about but still trying to act chill and go with the flow."
That is the pinnacle of digital Dadaism.
It's so good.
You have an image that defies all rational explanation, paired with a highly specific, deeply vulnerable confession of existential aimlessness. The contrast between the sheer absurdity of the visual and the crushing sincerity of the text perfectly encapsulates the modern emotional landscape.
It's hilarious because it's absurd, but it's devastating because it's true.
Exactly.
But this desire for the absurd doesn't just stop at creating and sharing images, because once people figured out they could manipulate images to show aimlessness, they started manipulating themselves.
The performative aspect.
Yes. They started engaging in massive collective world building just for the sake of being weird. We see these huge digital communities popping up where the entire point is performative absurdity. For example, there is a group on Facebook right now with almost 2 million members, primarily Gen Z and millennials, who spend their free time role-playing as ants.
The ant colony group is a fascinating sociological phenomenon. You have 1.9 million human beings agreeing to operate under a shared fabricated delusion.
Just pretending to be bugs.
They pretend to serve a digital queen. They obsess over pictures of dropped ice cream cones or Tootsie Pops covered in real ants, commenting things like lift and bite in massive coordinated comment threads.
2 million people. It is massive collective performative weirdness.
And it demonstrates how social media platforms, with their algorithmic grouping and endless scroll, facilitate a unique kind of collective dissociation. It is a collaborative improvisational theater piece happening 247 on the global scale.
And sometimes that collaborative theater actually breaches the digital walls and impacts the real financial world.
Which is where it gets really interesting.
Because the political edge of the Berlin Dadists is still very much alive today. We have to talk about the eye, mouth, eye stunt.
Oh, this is a brilliant example.
It's represented simply by those 3 emojis: an eye, a mouth, and an eye. This was orchestrated by a group of about 60 tech workers, and they managed to pull off one of the greatest, most absurd financial pranks of the decade.
To understand how the eye-mouth-eye stunt work, you have to understand the specific psychology and mechanics of the tech industry, particularly on Twitter.
How so?
Silicon Valley venture capitalists operate almost entirely on FOMO, the fear of missing out. Their biggest fear is that the next Uber or the next TikTok will launch, and they won't have invested in it early.
So they're always desperate for the next big thing.
They are constantly looking for signals of exclusivity and hype. And these 60 tech workers understood this algorithmic vulnerability perfectly. They essentially engineered a mirage.
How do they do it?
They all changed their Twitter display names to include the eye-mouth-eye emojis. They put cryptic links in their bios that led to a bare-bones landing page. The landing page asked for an email address to request access, but it never actually explained what the product was.
They gave absolutely zero information, just emojis and a text box.
Exactly. And because these were relatively connected tech workers, the algorithm started pushing their interactions to the top of everyone's feeds. The venture capitalists saw this coordinated emoji campaign, saw the mysterious landing page, and their FOMO kicked into overdrive.
They just assumed it was real.
They assumed this was the exclusive beta test for a revolutionary new app. They started hyping it up themselves, begging for invites, and throwing actual legitimate investment offers at the creators.
They were trying to throw millions of dollars at 3 emojis.
Yes, they were. They managed to trick wealthy investors and tech elites into funneling money into an absolute void. But instead of taking the money to build a useless app, the creators revealed the joke, leveraged the massive attention they had gathered, and diverted all those funds and donations directly to racial justice charities.
It's like Robin Hood, but armed entirely with internet irony and a deep understanding of algorithmic gullibility.
It was a very successful prank.
But I want to pause here. I really want to push back on something the source material.
Okay, go ahead.
When we look at all of this, millennials posting pictures of floating chickens, 2 million people pretending to be ants, tech workers scamming venture capitalists with emojis, are they really doing this as a profound psychological defense mechanism?
You're wondering if we're over-intellectualizing it.
Exactly. Is it possible that young people today just want to be quirky and random for the sake of internet clout? Can you truly compare a 22-year-old role-playing as an ant on Facebook to a daddiest artist fleeing the literal artillery fire of World War I?
It is a vital distinction to make, and it's really the crux of why this matters. I am not suggesting that the physical danger is the same. No one is dodging mustard gas on Facebook.
Right, obviously not.
But psychologically.
Yeah.
The experts and sociologists who study this draw a very firm, undeniable parallel between the systemic trauma of the 1910s and the ambient, inescapable trauma of today.
How do they connect them?
Well, think about the environment that a young adult in their 20s or 30s has grown up in. The World War I era was defined by rapid, terrifying changes that made the individual feel utterly powerless against massive state machinery.
Okay.
Today, younger generations are coping with a parallel set of overwhelming systemic anxieties. They came of age in the immediate shadow of 9/11, watching endless, unwinnable wars on television. They entered the workforce during the devastating 2008 financial crash.
So they realized early on that economic stability was an illusion.
Yes, they are buried under the crushing weight of student debt in an era of massive wealth inequality. And looming above all of it is the existential, undeniable dread of the climate crisis.
So they are living in a world where the rules they were taught growing up fundamentally do not apply to the reality they are experiencing.
Precisely. They were told that if they studied hard, went to college, and played by the rules, they would succeed. Instead, they're watching billionaires launch themselves into space while massive swaths of the population can't afford basic health care. And the physical planet itself is literally catching fire.
That is pretty bleak.
When the systems around you seem that illogical, that hypocritical, and that hostile to your future, expecting rational art or polite logical discourse is absurd. Adopting an absurdist viewpoint is not just quirky.
It's survival.
It is a highly rational, necessary psychological defense. Just like the artists in 1915 looking at a world that felt completely out of control and responding with chaos, a 20-something today looking at burning rainforests and unaffordable housing responds by sharing a deep-fried picture of a chicken in a pot.
It's their way of screaming.
It is a way to express profound frustration and disillusionment. It is a way of saying the world makes no sense, so why should I?
I hear that. I really do. The absurdity is the only language left that actually fits the reality of the situation.
Exactly.
But what happens when this digital absurdity, this need for chaos, actually bleeds out of our screens and starts infecting how human beings behave in physical public spaces?
Because it always bleeds out eventually.
Because the chaotic energy of internet memes eventually morphed back into the physical realm, creating this incredible, deeply uncomfortable phenomenon of cringe as performance art.
Now, to understand this transition from the digital screen to physical behavior, we first have to define what we mean by cringe in an artistic context.
Right, because there are different types.
We all know unintentional cringe. That is just someone failing socially due to a genuine lack of self-awareness.
Yeah.
An awkward public speech, a terrible audition, that is not art. That is just embarrassment.
Yeah, it just makes you feel bad for them.
What we are looking at is deliberate cringe. Deliberate cringe operates as a highly self-aware meta-commentary on authenticity. It purposefully blurs the line between irony and sincerity to make the audience deeply physically uncomfortable.
And the roots of using deliberate discomfort against an audience go back decades, right? You can trace it from Dada straight into surrealist cinema.
You certainly can.
Look at Luis Buñuel and Salvador Dali's 1929 film Un Chien Andalou. That movie has absolutely no logical plot. It just strings together dreamlike, deeply shocking juxtapositions.
The eyeball scene.
The most famous scene is a close-up of a razor blade literally slicing open a woman's eyeball, intercut with a cloud passing over the moon. It is viscerally revolting. It's designed to make you flinch, to physically unsettle you in your theater seat.
And then you follow that lineage into the extreme performance art of the 1970s. We cannot talk about weaponized discomfort without talking about Marina Abramović.
Oh, she is intense.
Abramović is a towering foundational figure in the use of discomfort and physical risk as a tool for audience engagement. She stripped away the safety of the traditional performer-audience dynamic. Look at her infamous 1974 performance piece, Rhythm Zero.
The one with the table of objects.
Yes. She stood passively in a gallery room. On a table in front of her, she placed 72 objects. Some were benign, a feather, honey, a rose, grapes. Others were dangerous. A scalpel, a metal bar, a whip, and a loaded gun.
A loaded gun.
She placed a sign on the table inviting the audience to use these objects on her in any way they wished, stating she would take full responsibility for whatever happened for the next 6 hours.
Which is just an unimaginably terrifying amount of trust to place in strangers.
And the experiment escalated into a terrifying revelation of human nature. It started tamely. Someone gave her a rose, someone fed her grapes. But as the hours passed and the audience realized there would be absolutely no consequences for their actions, the social contract just evaporated.
What did they do?
They cut her clothes off with a scalpel. They stuck rose thorns into her stomach. Eventually, one audience member picked up the loaded gun and pressed it to her head, which caused a physical fight to break out among the attendees.
Oh my God.
It was an excruciating experiment that pushed the boundaries of physical harm, revealing the incredibly dark, violent realities of power control and societal restraint when consequences are removed.
And she kept pushing those boundaries later on, too.
Yes. Consider her later piece, Balkan Baroque. In response to the horrific ethnic cleansing and trauma of the Yugoslav wars, she sat in a sweltering basement gallery in Venice for days. She sat on top of a massive pile of bloody, rotting cow bones.
That sounds horrific.
For hours on end, she vigorously scrubbed the flesh and blood off the bones while weeping and singing folk songs from her childhood. The stench in the room was reportedly unbearable. It created an atmosphere of collective, unavoidable, visceral discomfort.
You literally couldn't look away, and you couldn't escape the smell of the trauma she was representing. It forces the audience to physically confront things they desperately want to ignore.
That's the power of deliberate discomfort.
And that specific lineage, using intense awkwardness and discomfort to trap an audience, brings us to the modern avatars of cringe. And there's absolutely no modern avatar quite as bizarre or as controversial as Heather Morgan.
Better known by her rap alter ego, Razzlecan.
Yes, Razzlecan.
The story of Heather Morgan is where the digital, absurd, and high-stakes physical reality collide in the most spectacular fashion. She called herself the Crocodile of Wall Street.
A very humble title.
On paper, she was a tech entrepreneur and a Forbes contributor. But online, she cultivated this deeply unsettling persona as a rapper named Razzlecan. She produced these incredibly stiff, chaotic, low-budget rap videos.
They're so hard to watch.
She would stomp around the financial district of New York in gaudy, mismatched animal print clothing, wearing gold chains, aggressively rapping with absolutely zero rhythm or flow.
And the lyrics made no sense.
The lyrics were this bizarre mashup of corporate tech jargon, aggressive street persona, and hollow self-help rhetoric.
The videos went incredibly viral, but not because the music was good. They went viral purely because of how intensely uncomfortable and amateurish they were.
People love to hate it.
Watching her try to project this intimidating hip-hop swagger while rapping about data analytics in a leopard print jacket was excruciating. But the key to it all was that she committed to the persona so fully, so relentlessly, that she completely blurred the lines between self-parody and genuine delusional sincerity.
You just couldn't tell.
You watched it and thought, is this a brilliant satire of tech bro arrogance, or is she actually just this oblivious?
Yeah.
And then came the surreal climax of the entire story, the real-world twist.
The arrest.
Heather Morgan, the cringe-rapping crocodile of Wall Street, was arrested by federal authorities, along with her husband, for allegedly laundering billions of dollars in stolen Bitcoin from a massive cryptocurrency hack.
It is a plot twist so absurd that a screenwriter would reject it. The sheer goofiness of her cringe rap persona completely violently collided with one of the largest, highest-stakes financial crimes in the history of the Department of Justice.
Right, and this brings up a massive question for me about the nature of art and intention. When I look at someone like Razzlecan, especially knowing she was operating this massive criminal enterprise in the background, I honestly cannot tell if she was ever in on the joke with her music videos.
Many people wonder that.
Was the rap persona a deliberate smokescreen? Was it genuine delusion? But my real question is, does it matter?
What do you mean?
Does an artist need to be completely self-aware of their own awkwardness for it to count as performance art? Or does the sheer visceral discomfort that she causes the audience make it a valid piece of art, regardless of what her actual internal intent was?
This is one of the most debated questions in modern media analysis. The experts argue that the ambiguity itself, the inability to know her true intent, is exactly the point. Modern cringe performance art thrives in that gray area.
So not knowing is part of the experience.
When you watch a Razzlecan video, you are forced into a state of psychological tension. You don't know how to react. Are you supposed to laugh? Are you supposed to be concerned? It forces the audience to confront our own social norms, our assumptions about artificiality, and the deeply uncomfortable nature of public scrutiny.
It makes us question ourselves.
When you share a Razzlecan video and mock it, you are forced to question whether you are laughing with a brilliant satirist or laughing at a deeply misguided person. In doing so, the art turns the mirror back on us.
Oh, that's heavy.
It exposes our own social conditioning and our endless, ravenous appetite for consuming the public humiliation of others as a form of cheap entertainment. The discomfort reveals our own cruelty.
And we actually see visual artists today taking that digital cruelty and deliberate awkwardness and elevating it into traditional gallery spaces.
Like Christine Wang.
Yes, Christine Wang is an artist who literally immortalizes fleeting, embarrassing internet memes by turning them into massive, traditional high art oil paintings.
It's a fascinating juxtaposition.
She spends weeks painstakingly painting a low-res image of a crying cat or a cringy text message exchange. She is taking the quick, disposable digital cringe and freezing it in oil paint, forcing us to stand in a quiet gallery and really look at our obsession with public humiliation.
And then there's the artist duo known as Soda Jerk. They take corporate cringe and weaponize it.
Oh, the Pepsi ad.
Yes. A few years ago, Pepsi released an infamously terrible commercial starring Kendall Jenner. She basically solves police brutality and systemic oppression by handing a riot cop a can of Pepsi.
It was so tone-deaf.
It was universally mocked for how tone-deaf and awkward it was. It was a corporation trying to commodify the aesthetics of social protests. Soda Jerk took that commercial, chopped it up, and remixed it into a larger satirical film called Hello Dankness.
They used it against them.
They used the aesthetic of corporate awkwardness as a critical tool to attack the hollow activism of late-stage capitalism.
Exactly. They are harvesting the discomfort of the culture and using it as a weapon. And if performance artists and visual painters were weaponizing discomfort in galleries and on the internet, well, it was only a matter of time before television creators were right behind them.
Ready to completely blow up the polite, traditional formats we had grown comfortable with.
Yes. Let's get into the televised chaos. Because for decades, the television sitcom was the safest, most predictable box in your living room. You had a laugh track, a brightly lit set, and a rigid formula.
Very safe.
A minor problem arises, a misunderstanding between neighbors, a burnt dinner, people learn a valuable lesson, there's a heartfelt apology, and everything is resolved neatly in 22 minutes.
But the late 90s and early 2000s started to aggressively crack that foundation. You started seeing British cult classics like Spaced and The Mighty Boosh.
Those shows were wild.
They disrupted genre expectations by injecting sudden surrealism, bizarre musical numbers, and pure irrationality into the otherwise mundane sitcom format. They proved that audiences were hungry for something that didn't follow the rules.
And those British comedies cracked the door open, but they paved the way for the absolute explosion of weaponized, cringe, and aggressive absurdism that completely defined television in the 2010s.
The prime example, and perhaps the purest modern translation of Dadaism on television, is the Eric Andre show on Adult Swim.
I cannot watch that show without sweating.
The critical analysis directly compares Eric Andre's approach to the chaotic, anti-art performances of Hugo Ball and Tristan Tzara at the Cabaret Voltaire. Consider the structure of his show.
It looks like a normal talk show at first glance.
Right. It presents itself as a traditional late-night talk show, a format heavily defined by politeness, celebrity worship, and comfortable routine. You expect Johnny Carson or Jimmy Fallon, a monologue, a desk, a polite interview.
But every single episode of the Eric Andre show opens with Andre literally sprinting onto the set, screaming at the top of his lungs, and violently destroying his own desk.
It is pure mayhem.
He tackles his band members through walls, he shatters glass, tears down the curtains, and sometimes genuinely injures himself in the process, bleeding on camera. It is pure, unleashed, physical mayhem.
He takes the traditional, safe late-night format and turns it into an active hostage situation.
And then once he sits down in the rubble, sweating and panting, he brings out a celebrity guest. And often it's someone who has no idea what the show is. And he proceeds to subject them to these deeply unsettling, surreal interviews.
They'll start eating raw meat off his desk, or thousands of bugs will drop from the ceiling.
And he's not the only one doing this. The cultural shift toward weaponizing awkwardness on television also gave us Nathan For You, starring Nathan Fielder.
Nathan Fielder is a master of psychological discomfort. On his show, he plays a highly exaggerated, stiff, socially inept version of himself. A business consultant who approaches real, struggling small business owners with the most cockamamie, humiliating schemes imaginable to help them succeed.
The schemes are brilliant, but terrifying.
Give an example.
Like the time he convinced a struggling independent coffee shop owner to legally change the name of his store to Dumb Starbucks. He was utilizing the legal protections of parody law to just straight up steal the corporate giant's branding.
And people lined up for it.
Or the time he helped a neighborhood bar bypass strict indoor smoking bans. He legally reclassified the bar as a theater and staged a legally recognized play that consisted entirely of the patrons sitting around smoking cigarettes.
The brilliance of Nascent For You isn't just the schemes, though. It's the unbearable social tension he creates. Fielder utilizes the inherent authority of the television camera.
Because people act differently when they're being filmed.
Exactly. These real business owners are so desperate for success and so polite to the man with the camera crew that they will agree to do incredibly humiliating, illogical things just to avoid the awkwardness of saying no. Fielder stretches that social politeness until it snaps.
And we also see this boundary pushing moving away from comedy and into narrative dramatic television, particularly with Donald Glover's show Atlanta.
Atlanta is a masterpiece of surrealism. It constantly breaks postmodern boundaries to explore the existential, often highly absurd reality of being black in America.
It's not a normal sitcom at all.
No, the show frequently abandons linear storytelling. The character of Darius, played by Lakeith Stanfield, operates on a completely different philosophical plane than everyone else in the universe. He often acts as a Dadaist philosopher.
He really does.
The show features entirely standalone, highly surreal episodes like the Teddy Perkins episode or the episode with the invisible car. And crucially, the show refuses to hold the audience's hand.
It never explains itself.
It never stops to explain its internal logic. It simply presents a bizarre, sometimes terrifying reality and expects the viewer to either keep up or get left behind.
But wait, I have to push back here. I really struggle with the collateral damage to some of these shows.
Collateral damage.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about Atlanta challenging the viewer. But when we look at Eric Andre or Nathan Fielder, isn't there a huge risk of just alienating the viewer completely through sheer cruelty?
It's a fair question.
Watching Eric Andre violently destroy a desk is hilarious to a certain demographic, but it's also genuinely hostile. And when Nathan Fielder manipulates a real, desperate small business owner, a person who is actually struggling to pay their mortgage, into doing something deeply embarrassing on national television, it creates a suffocating level of secondhand anxiety.
Because they're real people.
These aren't actors, they're casualties of the art. At what point does the intellectual excuse of meta-commentary just become a veil for outright antagonism and cruelty towards your audience and your subjects? Where is the line?
It is a very fine, deeply debated line, and many critics share your exact discomfort. But the analysis of this era of television explains that this hostility, this precise discomfort, actually serves a vital artistic purpose.
How does cruelty serve a purpose?
By destroying the set, or by placing real people into agonizingly awkward situations, these creators are purposefully testing the limits of the medium. They are actively mocking the very foundation of television itself.
Okay, I think I see where you're going.
They're asking the viewer a pointed question. Why do you expect neat, polite, sanitized resolutions from a glowing box in your living room when the real world outside your window is messy, hostile, and utterly unpredictable?
So they're breaking the illusion.
The discomfort is the point. When you feel that suffocating secondhand anxiety watching Nathan Fielder, it jolts you out of your passive consumption. You're no longer just a couch potato absorbing a laugh track. Your heart rate is elevated, your empathy is triggered. You are forced to engage with the agonizing reality of human social dynamics.
It shatters the illusion of television as a safe, comforting pacifier.
Exactly.
Okay, I see the argument. They are using the awkwardness and even the cruelty to wake us up from the anesthesia of traditional media. They're forcing us to feel something real, even if that feeling is panic.
That's a great way to summarize it.
And all of these elements we've discussed so far, the total rejection of logic from the Dadaists, the internet's narcissistic obsession with itself, and this weaponized, hostile television cringe, they all perfectly culminate in one specific sketch comedy show.
The ultimate synthesis.
A show that completely defined the cultural mood at the end of the 2010s. We have to talk about Tim Robinson's I Think You Should Leave.
The critical consensus frames I Think You Should Leave as the absolute peak of modern neo-Dadaism. The brilliance of Tim Robinson's work lies in its incredibly tight, specific structure.
It's very formulaic in a good way.
He takes a very simple, everyday social faux pas, something minor that happens to all of us, like pushing a pull door or choking slightly on food, and he escalates it into absolute screaming nightmare territory.
And the engine of that escalation is always the same. It's the sheer, stubborn, pathological refusal of his characters to simply admit they made a mistake.
That is the core of the show.
Watching the show is like watching someone trip on the sidewalk in public. Normally, you just stand up, brush yourself off, feel embarrassed for a second, and walk away.
Right, that's what a normal person does.
But in Tim Robinson's universe, the person trips, hits the pavement, and instead of getting up, they furiously start digging a hole with their bare hands, clawing their way to the center of the earth, screaming at the top of their lungs, just to prove to everyone watching that they actually meant to travel underground.
That is the perfect analogy.
Huh.
The refusal to concede reality is the core joke. Consider one of the most famous sketches, the coffee shop interview.
Oh, this one is brutal.
Robinson's character is having a very pleasant, successful job interview at a coffee shop. As he goes to leave, feeling great, he accidentally pushes a heavy glass door that clearly has a sign saying, "Pull."
We've all done it.
The interviewer politely chuckles and points out the mistake. A normal person would laugh, pull the door, and leave. But Robinson's character is so deeply terrified of losing face, so fundamentally incapable of absorbing even a micro-ounce of embarrassment, that he grips the handle and begins aggressively, violently straining to push the door open.
He fights with it until he literally rips the heavy door completely off its hinges, destroying the storefront. All while screaming, "I was here yesterday." It actually goes both ways.
He destroys the physical environment rather than admit a minor flaw, and that absolute refusal to admit fault is what powers the entire series.
Another massive example is the hot dog car crash sketch.
Classic.
A man who is very clearly dressed head to toe in a giant, absurd hot dog costume crashes his hot dog-shaped car right through the front window of a high-end clothing store. The cops arrive, bystanders are everywhere, looking directly at the hot dog car and the man in the hot dog suit.
It's undeniable evidence.
And instead of confessing, he points at the crowd in feigned outrage and starts screaming, "We're all trying to find the guy who did this."
Which is just so perfectly illustrative of modern deflection that the internet instantly adopted it. It became the ultimate political meme.
Oh, I see it everywhere.
Anytime a politician or a CEO causes a massive crisis and then goes on television demanding to know how the crisis happened, Twitter is immediately flooded with pictures of the hot dog man saying, "We're all trying to find the guy who did this."
The show also meticulously skewers the specific artificial etiquette of the digital age. In one brilliant sketch, a group of women at a brunch are trying to craft the perfect Instagram pose.
Oh, the brunch sketch.
The unwritten rule of Instagram, which the show understands perfectly, is that you pair a highly flattering photo of yourself with a mildly self-deprecating caption so you don't seem arrogant.
Right, false humility.
But the character played by Vanessa Bayer fundamentally misunderstands the nuance of this artificial performative humility. She bypasses mild self-deprecation and goes completely overboard into terrifying, visceral self-loathing.
Her suggestions are wild.
She suggests captions like, "Load my frickin' lard carcass into the mud. No coffin, please. Just wet, wet mud."
It's wet, wet mud.
It's so visceral, so aggressive, and so jarring to hear at a polite brunch table. But beyond just being incredibly quotable and spawning thousands of memes, what is Robinson actually saying about us? When we strip away the screaming and the hot dog suits, what is the underlying psychology here?
The experts who analyze the show conclude that Robinson is brilliantly exposing modern online egomania. His sketches zero in on that desperate, frantic, distinctly modern intersection between wanting to be universally liked and absolutely refusing to ever be wrong.
It's a toxic combination.
He showcases how people weaponize their own vulnerability. In many sketches, when a character is caught in a lie, they will resort to fake crying or claim they are sick or throw a tantrum to deflect blame.
They turn themselves into the victim.
They manipulate the people around them, exhausting the social contracts until the victims actually apologize to the aggressor just to make the screaming stop.
Oh.
It is hilarious, but it holds a devastatingly accurate mirror up to the exact toxic, narcissistic, bad faith behaviors we see playing out on social media timelines and in political discourse every single day.
Which brings us to the most fascinating contradiction of this entire discussion. I Think You Should Leave is a highly aggressive, hyper-specific, incredibly loud, deeply uncomfortable comedy that highlights the worst aspects of human narcissism.
It really is.
So why on earth has this specific show become a comforting, warm safety blanket for an entire generation? People don't just watch this show, they rewatch it constantly when they are stressed.
There is a beautiful essay mentioned in the source material by a writer named Brianna Ziegler that I think perfectly explains this phenomenon, and it resonates with so many of us who use this media as a crutch.
What does she say?
Ziegler's anecdote is quite poignant and encapsulates the generational mood perfectly. She writes about being at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York, a glamorous, culturally significant event. She had a few minutes of downtime in a theater lobby, and out of a sort of morbid curiosity, she sat on the floor, pulled out her phone, and Googled climate change news.
Oh,
She was immediately hit with a paralyzing, crushing wave of existential dread. Reading the data, she realized the very tangible, impending reality of the Earth's heat death. She describes feeling terrified for parts of the world she'd never see and grieving for people she'd never meet. It was an overwhelming encounter with macro-level doom.
and her antidote to this overwhelming apocalyptic reality wasn't to read a hopeful book or call a friend or go join a climate protest.
No, it wasn't.
Her immediate coping mechanism was retreating to her terrible, cramped Airbnb to binge watch I Think You Should Leave. And she explains exactly why it works as comfort viewing.
It creates a bubble.
The show creates this hermetically sealed universe. In the world of Tim Robinson, the unspeakable massive horrors of our actual reality, burning rainforests, the rise of political extremism, mass global inequality, they simply do not exist. They are entirely replaced by the minute, hyper-fixated inanities of everyday life.
In the universe of that show, the biggest disaster imaginable isn't global warming. The biggest, most catastrophic event that can possibly happen is whether someone washed their hands after using the bathroom before touching a gift receipt.
Exactly.
The ultimate villain isn't a corrupt global dictator. The ultimate villain is an aggressive baby named Bart Harley Jarvis winning a local Baby of the Year contest.
Oh.
The show validates our minor, petty anxieties by temporarily making them the absolute center of the universe.
It provides a desperately needed escape from the macro anxieties that we have absolutely no control over. But I have to stop and ask the hard question here. Is it actually healthy for us to retreat into this kind of aggressive nonsense?
That's the million-dollar question.
When we sit in our apartments, exhausted from a 12-hour workday, watching a guy in a hot dog suit scream about a car crash, while the actual world outside our window is dealing with massive, systemic, potentially world-ending crises, are we just burying our heads in the sand?
Or in the wet, wet mud.
Exactly. Are we just burying our heads in the wet, wet mud instead of confronting reality? Does consuming this weird, daddiest cringe actually stop us from fixing the massive problems in the real world?
That is the ultimate question. And if we connect this back to the very beginning of our discussion in 1915, we find the philosophical answer. It is not about ignoring reality. It is about utilizing a necessary psychological pressure valve.
Like the artists in Zurich.
Think back to Hugo Ball and Tristan Tzara at the Cabaret Voltaire. They knew that reciting chance poetry and wearing cardboard suits was not going to literally stop the artillery fire or the mustard gas of World War I. They weren't delusional.
They knew it wouldn't fix the world.
In the same way, modern meme culture and cringe comedy cannot fix the climate crisis, they cannot cure economic disparity, and they cannot rewrite the tax code. But what they do provide is vital, necessary solidarity.
Solidarity through memes.
When you share an absurd meme or laugh at a deeply uncomfortable television show with a friend, you are reminding each other that everyone else is feeling just as overwhelmed, anxious, and confused by the absurdity of modern life. It breaks the isolation of anxiety.
It brings us together.
These art forms make us feel at home in our fragile, fallible humanity. They give us permission to laugh at the chaos when the weight of the chaos becomes too heavy for the human mind to bear. It is survival through silliness.
Wow. So, to bring this massive journey all together, we have traced an incredible, century-long lineage of human absurdity.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started in a tiny, smoky Swiss cabaret in 1915, watching artists pull random words out of hats and sign urinals to protest the horrific logic of a global war. We traveled through the clunky, pixelated early days of the internet, watching jagged MS Paint images mutate into global expressions of millennial anxiety.
The scared hamster.
The Bugs Bunny, the chicken in the pot. We looked at how performance artists and Wall Street rappers weaponized pure awkwardness to blur the lines of reality and criminal consequence. We watched comedians violently destroy the safe format of the television sitcom to wake up the audience.
And finally landed on Tim Robinson.
And finally, we landed on modern sketch comedy, where guys in hot dog suits crashing through storefronts provide us with the exact kind of existential comfort we need to survive the relentless barrage of the 24-hour news cycle.
It is a remarkable journey of human adaptation. It proves that we have consistently used absurdity to process the unprocessed trauma of our respective eras. But as we look to the future, the original philosophy of Dadaism leaves us with a fascinating and somewhat daunting proposition about what comes next.
Yes, and this is the final provocative thought we want to leave you, the listener, to mull over on your own. When you look at the core of Dada, the idea of removing human intention and relying on chance, like pulling words from a hat to create poetry, you realize something incredible about the technology being developed right now.
Artificial intelligence.
Exactly. AI tools like DALL-E and Midjourney are actually the ultimate perfect realization of the Dadaist dream. Think about it. They are literally algorithms designed to ingest massive amounts of data and create surreal, dreamlike combinations and bizarre visual juxtapositions.
Entirely without any underlying human meaning or emotional intent.
They are machines built to generate infinite, beautiful nonsense at the push of a button.
Which raises an existential question for the future of culture. As we move into an era where absurdity, random collage, and surreal nonsense can be generated instantaneously and infinitely by machines, what happens to human art?
If a computer can create a perfectly absurd image of a chicken floating in a pot in 3 seconds, what is the role of the human artist?
Exactly.
Will we, as humans, have to become even more intensely weird, even more aggressively cringe, and even more socially hostile just to prove that there's a flawed, sweating, anxious human being behind the keyboard?
Or will the pendulum finally hit the wall and swing back in the completely opposite direction?
Will the sheer flood of machine-generated irony leave us so exhausted that we abandon absurdity entirely and start craving pure, unironic, genuine sincerity instead? Think about that the next time you find yourself laughing at a meme that makes absolutely no logical sense. Until next time, thanks for taking the deep dive.